Hi, I'm Aaron.
And I'm Matthew. And during this training video, we're going to be talking about the style of beer called Oatmeal Stout. Now, Oatmeal Stouts are a pretty specific type of stout. It's born out of the style of an American stout. However, as you may suspect, it includes oatmeal into the grain bill, or the grain bill meaning the mixture of ingredients that create the overall beer. Now, what oatmeal will do to a beer is actually, it's more in the mouthfeel than actually in the flavors of the beer. It'll create a nice silky, creamy, smooth mouthfeel, which is indicative of the style. Most of these beers will hover anywhere between 5 and 6%. This one clocks in at 5.8%. And Aaron, why don't you tell us a little bit more about this one?
Sure, well, this one is Anderson Valley Brewing Company. This is their Barney Flats Oatmeal Stout. Now, this is one of their flagship beers. They're from Boothville, California, which is an hour or so, a couple hours north of San Francisco. Really cool brewery. It's been around for a while, but just over the past 5 years or so, they've been slowly transitioning to be an entirely sustainable brewery. Even on the cap now, it says solar power. I know you can't see it, but I'm going to show you anyway. It says solar powered brewery. They actually had to pull back on their production just this year because they were worried they were impacting the river too much that they were sourcing the water from. So they're very environmentally friendly. They try to be as environmentally sustainable as possible. Another really cool thing about them, they're from Boothville. There's a language only spoken. It's a jargon that's really only spoken or understood by the residents in and around Boothville. It's called bootling. And on every Anderson Valley bottle, you'll see ball horning since 1987. 1987 was the year that the brewery was incorporated, which, if you remember, is also the same year that Full Sail Brewing was incorporated, right. The ones that brew Session Lager out in Oregon. So same time frame. But it means it's good drinking in bootling. Thank goodness that they have that translation on the bottle so other people can find out what it means. You ready to get this one in a glass?
Let's do it.
All right. Also, another cool thing about Anderson Valley, I'm not sure why, it probably has to do with those weird bootling people, but every time they show a bear, they show a bear with antlers. I don't know, maybe it's like the creature from the Black Lagoon. Sierra Nevada had Bigfoot, so this Anderson Valley has to have...
Oh, Florida has the swamp ape.
That's true. I like the look of the bear with the antlers more than the swamp ape, though. Right. So, first thing we're going to do when we pour a beer, remember, is we're going to look at the beer. Now, this one, to me, Matthew, looks pretty dark. I don't think it's see-through at all, right?
I got a little bit of refraction of light through the bottom of the glass, but just a touch. I mean, enough to show that it does have some clarity, some sort of level of filtration. I suspect that the beer is actually clear, despite being black in color. And truly, this is almost a jet black color. If this was juxtaposed against some sunlight, we may end up getting some deep mahogany colors from it as well. But for all intents and purposes, this beer is just about as black as you can get.
Yeah, and it's very nice head retention, nice fluffy head, and also, we've talked about this before, some of that color on the beer is coming through in the head as well. The head's not just a regular white head, which means that it's a pretty quality brew. It was brewed very well.
Yeah, absolutely. We get a nice kind of mocha, almost like a chocolate milk type colored head, and as you mentioned before, really tight, pillowy bubbles. It leads me to believe that it's going to have a little bit of a creamy texture as well.
Okay, well, let's smell it. Not a whole lot coming through on the smell. I get a little bit of lactose, maybe. Some sugar.
Yep, milk chocolate, a little bit of white chocolate, just touches of roasted malt.
Yeah, nothing really jumps out at me.
Sure.
It's pretty balanced, but it's not an overly aromatic brew.
Yeah, absolutely. Low intensity on the nose, which is pretty typical of this style as well.
All right.
Let's go ahead and try this one.
All right, thought you'd never ask. So I'm getting more on the taste than I got on the aroma.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot more intensity there. Although the palate flavors do really follow the aromatics in the nose. I still, as you mentioned, that lactose sugar. Lactose is an unfermentable milk sugar, and what that does is the yeast won't eat it, so it basically translates as a residual sugar in the finished product, which gives it that creamy milkiness and a nice sweetness to it, which helps to complement some of these chocolate. And then the roastedness is slightly coming through too. You get just touches of chocolate. Yeah.
Now, with those unfermentable lactose sugars, that's how they can add sugar to the beer without making the beer upping the ABV, right?
Absolutely.
Because normally what would happen is that yeast would eat the sugar, and we all know that a byproduct of yeast eating sugar is CO2 and alcohol. So by adding sugar that the yeast can't eat, it doesn't taste good to the yeast. We can get that sweetness in the beer without having to sacrifice to higher ABV. So we can keep this beer, or a beer like this, very sessionable.
Sure, absolutely. And you also don't have to worry about using additives to kind of treat the beer afterwards. You don't have to add chocolate to it. You can use this unfermentable sugar to enrich the natural chocolate flavors of the malt.
Mm-hmm. Now, as far as having this beer in brass tap goes, it's available. I've seen it both in a bottle and on draft. And Anderson Valley does make cans as well. Not 100% sure if they can this particular beer, but I know they do can some of their beer as well.
Yeah.
It's going to be served into a pint glass, this particular beer, whether you're pouring it from draft or from the bottle. And what kind of brass tap guests do you think this would be a good recommendation for?
Well, typically your drinkers or your brass tap guests that are going to be drinking stouts are pretty familiar with the style as well. It usually takes a little bit of a progression to get into a beer like a stout, in this case an oatmeal stout, that does have a little bit more body, a little bit more texture, and a little bit more rich flavor than they may be used to. So for the most part, your guests that ask for stouts are going to be somewhat familiar with this particular style as well. It's one of those beers that'll almost sell itself. Now that being said, it does certainly have some characteristics that make it easily sellable. As we mentioned, the lactose sugar. That's a really interesting talking point that you can speak with your guests about, and also let them know that it does have some sweetness. A lot of people infer that the blacker or the darker a beer is, the more bitter and the more heavy a beer is. And despite this being relatively full-bodied, it's not especially heavy, and it's certainly not bitter. It's actually got a really nice, that oatmeal gives it that really nice silky texture to it. It's actually a very enjoyable drink.
Yes, and all that's really cool, but don't forget it's got a picture of a bear with some antlers on it too.
What better selling point than that?
Yeah, and the oatmeal, just to be clear, the oatmeal, you don't taste oatmeal, they just add that oatmeal for mouthfeel. Mm-hmm. They do the same thing, for example, with oysters. You'll hear every now and then an oyster stout. Well, it's not a stout that tastes like oysters. They just add oysters to the boil to manipulate the mouthfeel of the beer, the viscosity of the beer. But this is a great beer. I wish I knew some bootling to sign off, but we'll just say ball hornin'.
Ball hornin'.
Ball hornin'.